Hello, Raquel, Tom, can you hear
Hi,
us?
everyone. Yes, we can hear you.
Okay,
Yes,
we can
perfect.
start.
Hello, Tom. Hello, Raquel. Tom, I met Tom in Tel Aviv a while ago, last year. It was a pleasure. And Raquel is a new acquaintance. Hello, glad to meet you. So what we are going to do in this session is a kind of talk by Tom and then Raquel. And it's great to see you guys here. I would only ask that before you start, just drop one or two lines introducing yourselves to our audience, okay? So welcome again, Baruchim Abaim, and it's great to hear you. The floor is yours.
Okay, hello everyone. It's a great pleasure to talk with you about the alternative protein sector. I would like to thank Insper for this invitation. My name is Raquel Casselli. I am Corporate Engagement Director at Jaffa Brazil. And today I will talk a little bit about the landscape and some opportunities in alternative protein sector. Thank you so much.
So, Tom, do you want to start? Perhaps Tom and then Raquel. Let's do this order.
Yes. No, I think I am the first. I don't know if
okay.
Tom would like to make some introduction or after my presentation.
You can go ahead.
Perfect.
It doesn't matter to me.
Perfect.
Beautiful.
I will share my presentation. Just a second. Okay, I think it's okay, huh?
Yes.
Good. Okay. Perfect. So, for those not yet familiar with our organization, the Good Food Institute is a no-profit think tank that is building the roadmap for a sustainable, secure, and just protein supply. We are entirely funded by philanthropy. We have over than 100 staff members in 6 regions, so USA, Israel, Brazil, Europe, India, and East Asia. And we work with this programmatic area, and you can you can know more about our organization in our website. So we are working to support this big challenge, how we are going to feed 10 billion people by 2050 in a way that is more sustainable, healthy, efficient, and safe. This is a big challenge. We believe that alternative protein is one of the solutions able to contribute to that. So many people asked us why the sector is making food in a new way, but with the taste and the products that the consumer already knows. And actually the answer is because food is about culture, is about status, is a tool for socialization. It's a habit. So we realize that instead request that people change their habits, we work to deliver the same food that the people already love, but made in the other way. And I think this quote is really interested to understand our vision about that. So people don't resist change, they resist being changed. And this is part of our vision about why we do the things the way that we do. So to achieve this goal, this is our theory of change. So deliver delicious food at an accessible price in a place where people already buy their products. And of course, with the correct information for the consumer can make the best decision. And this is alternative protein. It's our scope, it's GFI scope in alternative protein. And why do we focus on alternative protein? Because we believe that proteins that are made directly for plants or with fermentation technology or by using animal cell culture. With these technologies, as I said, we can make the delicious food, we can make meat, eggs, seafood, and dairy products, these products that the people already love, more sustainably and efficiently. So now I will talk a little bit about some numbers that I believe can be interested for you understand more about this market. Here we have a global meat market forecast from A.T. Kearney, and this graphic demonstrates our vision for the future. In the consumer plate, all technologies will live together, probably. And the consumer will decide when they wish for conventional meat, plant-based meat, cultivated meat, or meat with ingredients for fermentation. And this is the company's visions. They are working to have all these possibilities for attending to their consumer. We have a quote in Brazil that this market is the market for and, not for or. So it's plant-based and cultivated meat and products made by fermentation and conventional meat, because this is part of our culture. Here you can see how plant-based retail sales in growing. Of course, we are talking about meat. I highlighted the number between 2019 and 2020, when the percentage was differently impacted by the pandemic. When the consumer changed their habits, stocking more food. So this is a number a little different, but we can see a number more stable, something close than 50%. And here we have numbers by region. Of course, markets more mature, like North America, for example, have growth more stable, and we can see, as expected, the potential of the Asian market. And we have a good number in Latin America, when Brazil is, and we expect great numbers in 2022 too. And to finish my presentation, because I need just 10 minutes and Tom is the big star today, I would like to talk about who is the consumer of alternative protein. This research and all companies and markets attested that in plant-based, for example, our target is not vegans or vegetarians, but the flexitarian. The consumer that is reducing their animal products consumption, but doesn't eliminate it from their diet. The main drive is healthy. They are concerned with aspects such as cholesterol, obesity, and heart conditions, for example, but they are not willing to give up the taste. So this is really important when we talk about this market. So this is really important when we talk about mimetic the sensorial aspects for the meat, for example, change this category so attractive. So now I am passing the word to my colleague from GFI Israel, Dr. Tom, and it's in the end I will talk with you about the Q&A, and this is it, Tom.
Thanks, Raquel, for the great introduction. Hi, everyone. I'm Tom, a senior scientist at GFI Israel. A background mainly in cultivated meat. This is what I did my PhD on. Based on that, a company called Alifam was formed. And I will discuss with you today about the different types of alternative proteins in terms of science and technology, and discuss health in the next 20 minutes. So why do we actually need alternative proteins? Intensive factory farming and poor animal welfare are a cause for foodborne illnesses such as the swine and the avian influenza. They also contribute to the spreading of E. coli, Salmonella, and Campylobacter, which can be found in meat. Growing cells in a sterile environment can reduce these kind of effects, or perhaps growing plants that don't have these effects. That's something that can really contribute to food safety. In addition, 70 to 80% of the antibiotics are currently being used in the United States, at least on farm animals. And overuse of antibiotic induces a selection of antimicrobial resistant strains, which is a major concern for human health. It's estimated that by 2050, antimicrobial resistance will kill more people than cancer and would cost almost $3 trillion annually to the OECD countries. Just to give you some sense, if you heard about colistin, the last resort antibiotics, now there are bacteria which are resistant to that because pig farmers use colistin on their pigs. This resistance started to spread throughout Asia and in South America. In addition to that, there was the first case a few years ago in 2017. There was the first case of a woman that came to a hospital in Nevada, and they found in her body bacteria that were resistant to all known antibiotics combined. They couldn't treat her, and sadly, after a while, she passed away. And the concern is that the more antibiotics we will use, the more frequent these cases will become. And if we can grow cells without antibiotics, or grow plants that don't consume, that don't require antibiotics, that could have a great effect on the effect of the antibiotic resistance. Another main motivation for alternative proteins is the negative environmental impact of animal agriculture, which, for example, emits more greenhouse gas emissions than all of the human transportation combined. If you discuss resource use, in order to generate 1 kilogram of beef, we need 15,000 liters of water to produce 1 kilogram. This industry also uses many of the croplands of the world. Estimates range from 40 to 77% of the land use. If you think about water use, just to make sense of the numbers, domestic use of water requires 5% of the water consumption of our population, whereas animal agriculture requires 55% of the water, of the fresh waters of our society. And the estimate is that by 2050, the demand for meat will double. So clearly, we need to find alternative routes of how to produce meat. Lastly, I will mention that animal agriculture slaughters over 100 billion animals per year in harsh conditions that most people don't even want to hear about. And this is another social motivation why we perhaps want to develop meat without using animals. So as Raquel mentioned, so what are the solutions? As Raquel mentioned before, the solutions are developing meat that will biomimic meat from animals, either from plants or from microorganisms or from cell cultures from animals. Some of the advantages in terms of health. So a report that was done in New Zealand tried to compare the health of meat alternatives compared to conventional meat equivalents. And they actually showed that most plant-based meats, in most cases, whether it's sausages, burgers, mince, and so on, most of them are actually healthier compared to the conventional meat equivalent. Perhaps maybe not mince, which was the same, but in the rest of them, we saw much better results. You can see here a more rigorous comparison that got to this health star rating, both in terms of energy, protein, fat, saturated fat, dietary fiber, sodium, and so on. So basically, we see that there are advantages, health advantages of the plant-based meats, However, we might want to advance them even more. If we think about the environmental impact, you can see a comparison of plant-based meat alternatives compared to animal products. We can see how much you can save in terms of land use, greenhouse gas emission, water use, and aquatic pollution, which really make an impact in that sense. And also a paper that was published in Science in 2020 tried to find ways to mitigate, basically to solve or reach our climate goals of the United Nations. And it found that the only food tech solution that could actually get to the climate goals is basically just enriching our diet with plants. So this is something to think about before we discuss the technologies. So let's start with plant-based meat. Plant-based meat, basically we can choose new plants that we can start working with. So usually we discuss soy, pea, and so on. However, we can try to think about novel crops that we can use that perhaps could be healthier. We can also develop novel crops for this industry that will be healthier, that will require less processing, and it will be more similar to meat. Another area for R&D could be the processing itself, developing new techniques to develop them, and developing final products. So let's go over quickly about each one of them. So in terms of source selection, we can see that there are actually many types of crops that are being used by the industry, mainly soy because it's very inexpensive and highly functional. However, there are novel proteins that are currently being used. At GE5, we did a comparison of the main qualitative measurements that are important for plant-based meat alternative, such as protein concentration, the amino acid composition, allergenicity, commercial stage, flavor, functionality, cost, and global crop volume. So basically, when you try to develop a meat alternative, you will have some kind of insight where there are things that needs to be improved, and why there are several reasons why to choose one over the other, or perhaps things that you can improve. In addition to the current crops that you can see here, we developed a list of novel proteins that are currently not being used quite much by the industry. And you can see here a list of products that just recently launched based on these novel proteins by startup companies. So, for example, for seaweed was used to develop a fish alternative in burgers, duckweed, which is a new novel healthy protein, also being used to develop burgers and eggs, and so on and so forth. I won't go one by one, but the point here is that we actually have novel protein sources that might be interesting in terms of their health qualities and processing. However, to me, the most interesting and important part of a plant-based meat is developing novel crops, basically improving the raw material by generating raw materials that are more suited for this industry. And this can have major implications on health because the farther the plants are from the final product, the more processed the product need to be. And if we can develop novel crops that require less processing, that could really make the products healthier and be safer and better for the consumer. And basic thoughts, I can give examples that Benson Hills, this company, developed a ultra-high protein soybean, and several Nusi cells developed a ultra-high protein chickpea. And we see some companies that are already starting to use those, and there are exciting development in that sense. And some things that you can think about when optimizing a crop, improving the raw material, is perhaps increasing the protein concentration, the iron concentration, perhaps increasing flavors of meat, some sulfur compounds that generate the flavor of meat. Perhaps we can try to optimize the amino acid composition that will be more similar to meat, adding meat flavors such as vitamin B1, which is thiamine that is responsible to many of the meat flavors. So these kinds of development of novel plants could be really influential both on health and the quality of the products and also the price. So this is something to think about. Additional thoughts are improving the plant so it will be more suitable for the processing and for improving the quality of the meat, such as improving the water holding capacity or the oil holding capacity and so on. However, I will just mention that, at least in my mind, this is the most important type of research that we can do, and hopefully this is something that we can think about, because current plants that we are using are actually optimized for other industries. We are currently using soy that was optimized for the oil industry or for the feed industry for cows, but not so much for our industry. In sake of time, I will continue on quickly. I'll mention that in terms of ingredient processing, the main hurdle that we need to think about is how we take globular proteins that can be found in plants and turn them into fibrillar proteins. So generating the texture of meat. There are several techniques that were developed, such as 3D printing, that generates some of the texture that we want by having the directionality of the printing, or shear cell technology that uses the process that uses shear force in order to align the fibers one another. However, we can think of many others, and developing novel processes that don't overheat the proteins is interesting. If we go over fermentation, fermentation basically is a general term for microbiology in alternative proteins. It's any kind of, it's the cultivation of any kind of microorganisms, usually single cell organisms, such as bacteria, yeast, mainly filamentous fungi or algae as a source material for meat alternative. There are three ways how we can use the microorganisms: traditional fermentation, biomass fermentation, and precision fermentation. In traditional fermentation, we basically use the microorganisms in order to process plant products. You can see that in yogurt or in tempeh. Also, wine is a good example, but not for alternative proteins. One example for that are Miyoko's cheese, which are basically being processed by microorganisms. So basically, the microorganism process the plant material. The main interesting, at least to me, the most interesting technology for fermentation is biomass fermentation. Trying to find novel microorganisms that we can eat. Here you can see examples of filamentous fungi that somehow recapitulate the texture of the muscle fiber and generate the texture of meat. There are several companies that produce this. And the advantage of these products that are basically in biomass fermentation, we basically consume the microorganisms in large quantities. We generate the microorganisms in large quantities, and then we can eat them. And you can see here the products. And the advantage of this technique is that you basically get a product which is clean label. It doesn't have much processing. It doesn't have many additives. It's one or maybe a few ingredients, and that's something that is rather interesting in terms of the health aspects. Also, the fact that perhaps you can do strain optimization, do artificial selection in order to advance the qualities of the microorganism is also interesting. Lastly, I will mention precision fermentation. This precision fermentation uses microbial hosts as cell factories for the production of specific functional ingredients. So basically, you use the microorganism in order to produce a specific molecule of interest. Perfect, they use that in order to produce milk proteins, and Impossible Foods use this in order to generate heme. Hemoglobin, which is a molecule that produces the flavor of meat. So you can use the microorganisms as a tool to produce molecules, or as a food source, as we saw here, or as a processing agent that can process other materials. Lastly, I will mention, in the brief time that I have, I'll mention cultivated meat. cultivated meat, we take cells, we isolate them from an animal, we culture them in large bioreactors where we let the cells proliferate to get as many cells as possible. We then put them in a different bioreactor that mimics the conditions in the body of the animal, putting inside its scaffolds. I won't go into that, I apologize. And then in these conditions, the cells grow and generate tissues, which we can then process and turn into food products. So this is the general the explanation of what cultivated meat is. You can see here different cell types. I apologize in sake of time. Usually I give this lecture in 45 minutes. But I will mention that the research of cultivated meat is very multidisciplinary. It requires both tissue engineering techniques that are from the pharma industry for transplantation. However, you want to do the optimization in tissue engineering, not for transplantation, but for food engineering, which means focusing on nutritional value, cost, flavor, texture, and not for transplantation where you want to do focus on a survival after transplantation and so on. So there is a multidisciplinary approach that combines tissue engineering, the generation of tissues, with food engineering, trying to optimize parameters that are relevant for food. And this is not just for the final products. When I do an experiment, I want to, if I add a growth factor to the cells, I want to check how it affects. I want to check the effect on the meat quality and not on something else. In addition to that, there is much focus on the bioprocess, on the scale-up of generating the cells or the tissues in very large quantities that we never saw them before, because for transplantation industry, we never use the sizes of bioreactors that we need for here. So this is another novelty in terms of R&D, and there are exciting opportunities in that area as well. Some advantages of cultivated meat in terms of the industry: you can produce actually novel meat products that we would never have been able to produce from animals. For example, combinations of muscle from cow and fat from sheep. We have direct control on the cells, so we can try to make the meat healthier by introducing healthy fats into the cells. Whereas in meat from a cow, you cannot give the cells directly whatever you want. It needs to bypass through the stomach of the cow, and the body of the cow determines what will get to the cells. And here we have direct connection, so we can add antioxidants, add the other molecules that will make the products healthier or more unique or tastier and so on. In addition to that, we are producing meat in a sterile environment. And that's, if you got a meat at the supermarket, you know that it is full with bacteria. And here we produce meat in a sterile environment. And in terms of, so we don't have any, if you know, in meat, there is so much, you know that if you buy meat, you shouldn't wash it, for example. When we did isolations of meat from slaughterhouses, the meat was so contaminated, it was very difficult to get meat which is sterile. So the fact that we can produce meat that was produced in a sterile environment, that's something of novelty in terms of shelf life and food safety. Lastly, in addition to that, in terms of the producers, the meat producers, they actually want cultivated meat to succeed, because meat producers prefer to have processes which are reliable and repeatable. If you think about a cow that produces meat, some of the cows run more, some of the cows eat more, some of the cows get sick, and this generates lots of variability in the starting material. And because of that, if you can produce meat from cells in a very repeatable process like done in the pharma industry, this is something of high value for the meat producers, because they don't need to, because if you get meat from a cow, sometimes it will have 5% fat, 6%, 7%, they always need to adjust it. And here we can give them the same material, exactly the same every time, and we can produce it in a matter of weeks rather than years, and that's something of an interest for them. Lastly, I will mention in terms of advantages, in terms of the ecological crisis, there are estimates that cultivated meat as compared to meat from cows, when produced in using renewable energy, we can save a lot of land, water, air pollution, toxic chemicals, and greenhouse gas emissions. So there are many possible advantages for the industry. Thank you for your time in listening, and I hope it was interesting. And if there are questions, we'll be happy to answer.
Thank you so much, Tom. It was a great presentation. So before I open to a Q&A, I do have a question for you both. Okay, so actually you can answer each one, but if you want also to choose who is going to answer, it's also great. I would love to know a little bit more about the Good Food Institute, what you actually do. And I will plug to this kind of a huge, wide question, to this umbrella, a very specific concern, okay? And that you might want to address. I think everybody who has followed this industry remembers the problem that we all had with Monsanto's kind of communication around genetic modified food. And I think there's still kind of a shadow of concern about the impact of genetic modified. And to be sure, nothing that you have said is related to modification of genes. I want to make sure of that. Regardless, people might say, okay, this is super processed, there are tons of new processes here. We don't know whether this is safe. We don't know whether this is really healthy. I listened to you guys. I'm sure you are sure this is very healthy and safe. But my question then is how you work, GFI works, to improve awareness around these new processes, around these new foods, because I think this is part of the challenge of making these technologies widely adopted across the globe.
Perfect. I think I can talk a little bit about GFI, and Tom can talk about the technology and how safe he is. So about GFI, as I said, we are a no-profit organization. We work in 3 key programmatic departments. In science and technology, we support the advanced and open source, the foundation science of alternative proteins. So we work with scientists, universities, and institutions to foster the scientific information about our sector. My department is corporate engagement. We work with companies, investors, startups, retailers, food services, and my work is basically understand how I can support each stakeholders to have more and better products for everybody. And the policy team advocates for fair regulation of alternative protein sector, lobbies for government investments and sustainable protein R&D in all regions. So we work in these 3 areas. And Tom will talk about the technology, but about GMO, we follow the science, and the science said that GMO is safe. In 2020, we had a meeting, research, in Brazil about the plant-based consumption. And we asked for our consumer if soy or GMO was a question for our consumer, and the answer was no. The Brazilian consumer don't have any issue to buy products that have soy or GMO. Actually, I think that the big issue that we are talking about that is the impact for these commodities is not to feed the humans, is to feed the animals. Nowadays, 70% for everything that we cultivated is for feed animals, not for feed people. And I think this is our goal, what we are looking and understand how we can direct it or using all this land, all this water, all this food to feed people. This is a big challenge that alternative protein can be a solution. And Tom, please, if you can talk more about the technology, how safe it is.
Yeah, I just want to share, first of all, I want to share, I just came from this conference that discussed genetic modification in plants that show this very exciting tomato that is actually healthier because it's genetically modified. And actually the approval for genetic modification is becoming much easier. This genetic modified tomato was actually approved in 1.5 years rather than 10 years as it was before. And we actually see that there is advances in this area as well. And I think that this is something that we should really praise Brazil for being positive in terms of genetic modification. But that's a side. So first of all, everything that we discussed until now doesn't require genetic modifications. However, there is nothing wrong with it. Saying that, I would say that I agree that there is a negative public relation regarding genetic modifications, mainly because products that were developed there is something that we should learn from genetic modification is that when we develop products, they should focus on the consumer. GMOs that were developed in order to help chemical companies sell their chemicals to farmers. And when you have something like this, for sure, the consumer it's easy to convince consumers that this is horrible. And perhaps those companies didn't do things right. And part of our responsibility is to develop products which are healthier, which are better to the consumers, and then the consumer will take them. Regarding the safety of these processes, so this is something that is extremely important and it's currently being regulated, and the regulation is currently being discussed in order to make sure that everything is safe. Because plants are usually defined as healthier, if we develop them in less processed techniques, even the processed ones are considered safer than probably healthier than meat. But my focus is that we shouldn't just take things as given, and we should develop products which are healthier. And the way to do it, first of all, products should be tasty, because if they are not tasty, people won't buy them. But also, if we can develop them to be tastier and more suited to become meat, as we mentioned before in crop optimizations, perhaps this will have synergistic effects of both developing products which are tastier, cost less because they require less processing, and healthier because they are less processed. And this is something of an impact that we can do by advancing crop optimization for this industry. Regarding and this is a key focus, I think, that both precision biomass fermentation and crop optimization could really generate an industry which is better for the consumer, and this is something that could be wonderful. Even so, as I mentioned in the lecture, currently plant-based products are still healthier than meat, but this shouldn't be our goal to be just healthier than meat. We should make products which are just great. Like if you think about eating if you think about eating legumes, which are raw legumes that are perhaps cooked, which are very unprocessed, this is something great. But and if we can, and this is for sure better than eating the processed one, but also the processed one are better than meat. So at least in my mind, the goal is to even get it as close as possible for the raw legumes by crop optimization. And I repeated that like 20 times already, so maybe I will stop here and wait for the next question.
Well, thank you. I have a couple of questions still, but I want to hear from the audience any questions before I move on with some questions here.
I have one, but I prefer to do it after yours because it's going to be a little bit more out of the context.
Okay.
Just provoke.
Any question from audience? You still need some more time to think about them. So I'm coming back to you, okay? So you know that I am going to cold call you again, all right? So something that is interesting for me is I love that slide that Raquel showed on the theory of change. That was super nice chart. And I'm sure that somehow you have to talk with many stakeholders, many of them, and I would love to touch on some specific stakeholders. So I want to hear a little bit on how GFI, how do you guys approach governments? You know, so I'm sure some governments are a little bit more, forward-looking, a little bit more into the future, and some of the governments are a little bit more resistant. So I would love to hear your experience on approaching governments and on these new technologies, and how do you handle, or how do you try to approach any kind of resistance that is offered against this progress?
Okay, I would like a little bit about that, especially in Brazil, and if Tom can add some comments. So we have a VP in Brazil, and he is the specialist to talk better than me about this work. But we work especially in regulatory aspects and some things about taxes also. So the work is how we can provide the best information for the regulatory institutions for that, because they need the best information to make good decisions about this market. In Brazil, we work a lot with Anvisa and MAPA about plant-based and cultivated meat and fermentation. They are really open to understand how this technology are and how we can work with this technology. Of course, when we have big companies like JBS, BRF, Nestle, Danone, Unilever in this scenario, this is help a lot. Help startups, help all the sector, because the government understand the size of this market and this potential. We also work to show for the regulatory and the government how this sector can be a big business for our economy and our agribusiness. And actually, this is a way that we need to run. When we have China, for example, that is our main business partner, announced that announced alternative protein in their development plan in 5 years. This is a big issue for everybody, especially for Brazil and other countries that supply for China. So we really believe that Brazil in alternative protein can be a big leader, and alternative protein can be big business for agribusiness, and the government is pay attention in this message, and we work closer than the government, and this is independent of the government. Cabral is our policy VP, and he's always say that we play without a judge. So we work in all the world with all the government, understand what's the best way to advance our market.
I can add just a sentence or two, just saying that in Israel, what worked for us well, as Raquel mentioned, just showing them that there is, looking at this as an investment. If they invest in this now, in Israel, we told the government to invest in this, they invested, and currently Israel got already investment in $600 million, basically showing this an opportunity for them to advance Israel economy. I think that when you discuss this, if you can get a few top researchers on board or a few influential people, discuss with the government, show them that this industry is booming, there is lots of investment, and this is a way to get the government on board, showing them the opportunity in terms of a new workforce and so on.
Thank you. I think it was within your talk, both of you, that I started thinking about the role of corporate, of the major big players nowadays, both in the food industry, but also in the pharma industry. Okay, so I'd love to hear a little bit from you. How do you see the role of corporate, the big corporate players right now, and how do you address these roles and these interests? Okay, so specifically, some of the technologies that you have identified today might be disruptive to some of the big players, right? Some of the big players might be concerned that perhaps some of these technologies will change too much the distribution of market share, the distribution of power, how they access supermarkets downstream until the final consumer. And at the same time, we do see many big players investing massively in startups. So here in Brazil, we have JBS, we have BRF, we have big players co-investing in Israeli startups as well. So this is interesting. Then the second part of my question, which is still corporate on the pharma side, and coming back to the theme of this session, coming back to health, right? If we change the technologies, we might also change how certain pharma companies earn money, right? Because you are going to, decrease some of the diseases, decrease some of the problems. So you might also find some resistance from big pharma as well, because you are going to ultimately steal some business from them. So I'd love to hear your impressions on the role of corporate in this whole scenario.
Perfect. So so this is my area, and of course I have a little bias about that, but I really believe that the big corporations can deliver the scale that this market need, and they can do the potential that we can do in alternative protein sector. When we see the company like JBS, for example, investing in cultivated meat, that the sector is really new and we need a lot of money, a lot of technology. Imagine how fast and how good this company can advance the technology and advance the process to deliver a more scalable process, and in the end of the day, more products. And I think this is a big goal for us. When we talk about feed 10 billion people, we talk about price. We talk about how accessible this sector should be. And I believe that big companies has a big role in this way. They are looking for attend the consumer in any necessity. So if JBS, for example, and BRF and Marfrig and other animal companies, if my consumer wish animal meat, I have. If they wish plant-based meat or cultivated meat or meat with ingredients made from fermentation, I have. So I attend my consumer in all situations, and this is a big opportunity. Of course, we have a link in this chain that is the farmers. How we can include the farmers in this market. In plant-based, this is more okay. It's easier. We include the farmers in plant-based market. I think in fermentation too, and we think about the cultivated some fungus, for example. In cultivated meat, this is a challenge yet. So about pharma companies, GFI nowadays work especially with pharma companies, especially in cultivated meat sector, because some raw materials can be the same or really similar. But this is a good point. Not just pharma companies, but other companies that nowadays exist with from the products like I don't know what's the best way, but that using the waste of the animals, for example. This is a challenge that everybody in society, the companies and all the actors need to think about.
First of all, I will say that in terms of corporates, we need the corporates. They are the experts, they know how to run things, and they are going to make this industry succeed. So we thinking about, at least to me, the people that I love to talk with the most is the meat industry. So we are not against them, we are just producing meat more efficiently. And this is why they love this industry, because basically they just see this as a novel way to make the industry more efficient. One of the classic quotes from the recent CEO, I think was of JBS, said if we can produce meat without animals, why wouldn't we? From their side, basically if you can produce meat more efficiently in a more reliable way, or get correcting the meat production based on quickly based on changes in the market. This is something very valuable for the industry, producing food more efficiently. And they understand that if they are not going to join, then someone else will do it and will get and they will just lose market because of that. So they just understand that there is this is something valuable for them. And also for us, because without them, this industry will not succeed.
And I think, I'm sorry, in the end of the day, win a money that they don't win nowadays. So if we have more food, we can sell more food, we can win more money. So this company is looking for this way too. So win my money, and I can sell all my animal meat, but we have a limit for the animal production, and we can have more scalable and more food, and in the end of the day, more money for this company. So this is a big opportunity.
Nice, thank you. Tom, I know that it's kind of late in Tel Aviv right now, but I do have time for another question. For a final one?
Of course,
Yes?
Charles, you are welcome to ask even more.
Cool. There is one question from the audience. Rodrigo, please.
Hello, Tom. Hello, Raquel. I'm gonna address a question about a broader question about food, the food market. There's a lot of studies showing that there's an estimated world population that is going to be challenged to be fed by the resources that we have, right? A lot of studies showing that the growth of global population will raise a lot of food challenges. At the same time, when you're showing us technology to produce plant-based protein, thinking about an innovation perspective, how can this food technology be a possible way to address these challenges of feeding a growing world population, right? Do you think that this is the first question, right? And is this scalable? Right? Because we have a lack of space, right? Because all people who are studying these, United Nations and the other institutions, they're showing that if we grow in population, we won't be able to feed people. And at the other side, this might be a huge opportunity for us to feed already people who are underfed, and at the same time addressing the challenge that is global. I don't know if this is too broad, but I was wondering if we could discuss that.
This is a great question. Basically, currently, in order to produce 1 calorie of animal meat, we need 9 calories of plants. So basically, plants is the main, this is the way food is produced by plants. Basically, in meat, we basically filter our nutrients through animals. So the cow is not an optimal, and if you feed the cow its entire life food just to eat it at the end, it means that you are wasting a lot of material, a lot of food, a lot of water. And basically, plants are just much more efficient in a way to produce food. So as we mentioned, plant-based products can really save in terms of lands, greenhouse gas emission, water use, water pollution, and also productions of proteins and calories. I don't have it here in this specific graph, but essentially, the logic is that if people will eat plants, we'll have much more food. I don't have the exact numbers right now, but it is known that the issue is in the growing world is not only the increase in the amount of people, but also the change of diets, that people will eat a more modern Western diet that will consume more meat. And that's a main issue in terms of our, even more than the population growth. And basically the way that we need to think of it is how we can get as many people as possible to eat plants rather than animals. And the way to do it is just to make tastier plants, because people just don't want to eat food which is tasteless good. So if we can produce food that would biomimic meat in terms of the quality, we can get that, and then we can really meet the issues of the starving world and try But this is a concern that we have. This is the main reason why GFI. The main question usually we start a lecture is how we are going to feed the growing world, and the only possible solution probably is to find ways to make plants tastier so people will eat them.
Any more questions? Well, I think we are approaching the time.
I have one more.
Please. I think they are still
Because
still up.
Tom raised my curiosity. I understood better the slide that you already had showed about the possibilities that food tech can bring in terms of feeding the world population. The other thing is, what about the cost? Do you think that would be possible to offer this type of plant-based protein at a low cost in cases of the people who are already underserved in terms of nutrition? Would this be something that could be offered at a competitive cost?
So I will say the answer is yes. The main issue, so plants are the cheapest thing in the world to grow. You grow plants, they cost almost nothing. It costs nothing to grow the plants. What is costly is the processing. And the processing is costly because we have inefficient raw materials that are not optimized for this field. We take materials, plants that are optimized for the feed industry or for the oil industry. And because of that, when you have bad, inefficient raw materials, the entire process is inefficient. So currently, development of products is trial by error. Is people just, for example, in extrusion, people just put materials in and they just try it. And this makes the entire R&D of alternative proteins very expensive. And because of that, we generate products which are very inefficient and they are of low quality. However, when we will develop novel crops that are optimized for the industry, and the process will be, and if we will have much less processing, so the plants themselves will be very close to what we aim to do. Let's say that you will have a soybean that is optimized for fat from animals. The fat in it will be very similar to fat from animals, and you just need to harvest the oil, which will be much more efficient. And use it almost as is. If we can take plants and extrude them directly, you don't need to isolate the proteins. If the composition of the plant will be already very similar to the final product, all of these products will be much cheaper. And for that, we just need more R&D, more development of novel crops, and development of processing, which is or less processing, or just developing the processing, the efficient and reliable and repeatable processing that we actually understand well. And when you will have something like that, the plant themselves cost almost nothing. So I think that generating a high quality plant-based meat alternative is something very logical. Also, with the fermentation, with the cultivated, I think it will take time until it will reach price parity or become less costly.
And I'd like to add some comments. Of course, when we talk a country as Brazil, with our biodiversity and the potential of our crops and our plants, we have a big potential to understand how we can use this biodiversity in our products. So nowadays we use pea, for example, and pea, we import pea. And this is for us is in dollar. And 1 Brazilian reais, I believe that is, the opposite. $1 is 5 Brazilian reais, something like that. It's not just the protein, but all the flavors, the oil, the everything nowadays is most part of is imported. So I think I agree 100% with Tom, and he already said about the new crops, and I think this part, new ingredients, especially national ingredients, can support the price be more accessible. So I think Brazil has a big potential to use our biodiversity in our to make ingredients for our products and to export ingredients for all the world.
Really good.
We still have time for a little bit more.
Anybody else? Or I'm taking over the conversation, but I got very interested when you were talking about Brazil, Raquel, because I think there's a great opportunity of collaboration amongst people who are working with technologies for food production, because either way, we are a very active country in terms of agriculture, right? This is a huge pillar of our economy, and at the same time, we're a huge market, and there's a lot of opportunities of addressing our population also as a big market. Do you envision any type of collaboration amongst Brazil and Israel? Tom is from Israel. Renata, Raquel, I believe you are living in Brazil. So what's your thought about that?
Oh, 100%. We have nowadays the partnership between BRF and Aleph Farms, an Israeli startup to produce cultivated meat in Brazil. And Israel, it's a big innovation hub, and all companies, all Brazilian companies and startups looking for Israel and what happened in Israel and how we can share knowledge with this country. So we work really close, and I believe, of course, we have some challenge. So first, we need that the Israeli companies have interest in Brazil, because we know that, of course, we are a huge market. But some companies have a specific strategy. So maybe some sell in Israel or sell in Asia, that it's a bigger market nowadays, and how we can make some license, for example, and this type of commercial agreement are really possible. And we are working a lot in this way, not just with companies, but with our scientists, and how we can share the technology, the knowledge, and how we can collaborate more in alternative protein sector.
I would say that I love this question. I think it's really important. I would say we need to think about the two countries and what are the advantages and strengths and weaknesses of both. I think Brazil has great experience and data about meat science, and that's something that would be amazing for Israel, because Israel don't know much about this. So I think every lots of experience in meat science. Also, crop research. I think there could be great collaborations. Because Brazil has huge lands and Israel doesn't. So I think that those two are some advantages in Brazil that could be amazing for Israel. Israel also have lots of universities with expertise also in tissue engineering, in biotechnology, and etc. And I think it would be, and Israel currently doesn't have enough researchers. So if students from Brazil would want to come to Israel and do research here and learn techniques from Israel and perhaps take them back to Brazil, I think that could be wonderful for Brazil as well. So basically, if students here want to come to Israel, learn, and then come back and open a lab, I think that will be wonderful. So I would say meat science, crop development and coming to Israel in order to do research, because Israel really has too much money and we would really appreciate it if you come and take it.
Thank you. Oh, peraí, deixa eu só agradecer.
Thank you, Raquel and Tom, for the answer. Very enlightening. Really good. Tem mente.
Um feedback sobre a sessão online aqui.
Oh, we have a feedback already? Have a Menti? Do you want to project?
No, yes, I need your project. So we are broadcasting the session, and we like people here to answer, and on YouTube also.
Espera um minuto, eu quero dar a minha palavra também.
Okay, so I will share the results here.
Let's see what came out from our Mentigram. So we have healthy, which is I would be very worried if we read unhealthy, but if we are reading healthy, and healthy is a good one. So it's nice that people share the idea that this is the future. And I think tomorrow we're going to have several sessions on the future. And I think this was a pretty much futurist session as well. It's interesting that flavor, yummy, and it's not because it's healthy that shouldn't be delicious, shouldn't be tasty. So I think this is also interesting because it's not either or, it's both at the same time. And I think it's interesting also that we were able to map out some of the challenges that are related to this trend. So I think it was a very, very productive session. So thank you very much, Tom. Thank you very much, Raquel. Toda rabá, erev tov. Thank you very much.
Toda rabá. See you in Israel, and shalom.
Shalom. Bye bye.
Tchau, pessoal. Muito obrigada.